Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today because service members who risk their lives protecting our nation should not have to ever worry about predatory banking practices. They shouldn't have to worry about whether they can vote absentee while serving abroad. While they're fighting our nation's foes, they shouldn't have to worry about fighting a foreclosure. And when they're serving our country, they shouldn't have to worry if their civilian job, if they're Guard or Reserve, they shouldn't have to worry if their civilian job will be available when they return. Unfortunately, too many do worry about that. Last week, I joined the Attorney General of the United States at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base near Dayton, Ohio, and spoke with men and women who serve our country, airmen, airwomen. Also, around that time, spoke to some Guard and Reserve members of the Guard and Reserve who serve our country about some of these fraudulent practices, that when they're overseas, some of them don't know if they return, if they're going to still have their job. They don't know what happens to them when they go back to school. If they were enrolled in a university, private or public, or 2-year or 4-year, they don't know what happens sometimes with their families and foreclosure and financial fraud. We know that employment's critical for service members and military families. So is housing, so is protecting their ability to cast a ballot. That's why I'm sponsoring legislation, the Servicemembers Protection Act, which is so vital to those men and women in uniform. It would make critical changes to the Service Members Civil Relief Act that could improve the quality of life for members of the armed forces. My bill first would strengthen housing and lending rights for service members. Right now, a bank cannot foreclose upon a service member while they're serving overseas until it gets a court order. Yet the bank has no real obligation to actually investigate whether a homeowner is on active duty overseas. My bill would require lenders who want to foreclose on a home to conduct a meaningful investigation into a borrower's military status. It would increase civil penalties for violating a service member's rights as a homeowner. The bill also would strengthen enforcement for the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act to make sure service members' votes are counted. It would create a nationwide standard for getting absentee ballots to overseas service members in a timely fashion. And finally, Mr. President, it would make sure service members can return to their jobs after they've completed their military services with the seniority and pay rate that they would have earned if they remained continuously employed by the civilian employer. We know that the Guard and Reserve that are called up leave their civilian jobs, too often come home to the uncertainty of what happens when I arrive home. Members of the Guard should not have to worry about whether they will return home to the same job and the correct pay rate. As citizens of a grateful nation, we have a responsibility to do something, more than something, to protect service members' rights as they sacrifice to keep our country safe. That's why I urge my colleagues to stand up for our service members. It's time we serve those who served us. Thank you, Mr. President.